Draco Malfoy and the Depths of the Mind. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 16. Always one step behind. It took Draco too long to locate Snape. He wasn't in his office when he first knocked. Neither did he find him in his classroom or the storage space, and only when he returned to his office once more out of desperation did he turn around the corner, his eyes narrowing at the sight of him.
"Mr. Malfoy," he drawled, "to what do I owe the pleasure?"
"I need to speak to you," Draco rushed to say, not caring that he was out of breath and most probably disheveled from running all over the place. "In private, please, sir, it's urgent." Snape took in his appearance for a long moment, then nodded, pushing past him to unlock his office with a swish of his wand.
"Very well," he said. "In you come." Draco did not take the seat Snape offered him. Instead, he came straight to the point, bursting out as soon as the door had closed behind them.
"Harry had a dream, and now he's convinced that the Dark Lord is holding Sirius Black in the Department of Mysteries."
Snape held Dan halfway to his desk to stare at him. His dark eyes were sharp and unforgiving, piercing through him, and Draco's walls went up immediately, even though in this instance he had nothing to hide.
"That," Snape said, his voice flat, "is impossible."
"It's what Harry saw," Draco insisted.
"And now we need to know whether it was a real vision, like the one when Mr. Weasley was attacked, or if the Dark Lord planted it there to lure him to the Ministry."
Snape was still staring at him in that unnerving way, and Draco found it utterly frustrating. He balled his fingers into fists as he waited for his teacher to answer his request. Finally, Snape took a seat, folding his fingers as he looked at him.
"And what exactly do you expect me to do, Mr. Malfoy?" he asked in apparent calmness.
Draco gaped at him.
"You're a member of the Order!" He pointed out the obvious. "You must have ways to communicate. Ways that Umbridge can't control. Use them. Find out whether Sirius is safe or not. If he is, then we know to ignore the vision. If not, then you need to send someone to rescue him before Harry takes his sonic firebolt and flies across Britain to do it himself."
Snape did not outwardly react to Draco's little speech, and it made the hair on the back of Draco's neck rise with how on edge he was.
"Potter really does tell you an awful lot, does he not?" Snape said at last, and his voice was low, soft, but dangerous. "Considering who you are, and who your father is, you have no business knowing who's a member of the Order, and who isn't."
Draco groaned.
"Isn't that a little beside the point now?" Draco demanded. "You can chastise us later. Now we need to find out whether Sirius—" "How do I know whether I can trust a word you say?" Snape challenged.
Draco opened his mouth, outraged.
"Excuse me?" "There's a reason you're not in the inner circle of the Order, Mr. Malfoy. You are the son of a Death Eater. Not only a Death Eater, but one of the Dark Lord's closest confidants. For all I know, you might be doing undercover work for him, or he might have you under the Imperius Curse."
Draco couldn't help it. He laughed.
"With all due respect, sir,"
Draco ground out, barely restraining himself,
"this is rich, coming from a spy who walks both sides."
Snape smiled at that, inclining his head. "I'm glad you see my point, Mr. Malfoy," he replied. "Now let me ask you, why have you come to me if you don't trust me?"
"Because we don't have another choice,"
Draco growled, opting for the truth.
"There's no one left to go to. You were the only reasonable option I could think of, though right now you're making me reconsider the reasonable, mind you."
Snape just leaned back in his chair, not rising to Draco's bait. Draco took a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't getting him anywhere.
"Listen," he pleaded. "If you don't help us, Harry is going to do something stupid, and I can't let that happen."
"Potter is always doing something stupid," Snape shrugged. "How is that my responsibility?"
"Because if you really are on our side,"
Draco ground out, his jaw hurting from restraining himself,
"then it's in your best interest that Harry doesn't get himself killed before the war is even started. You might dislike him, but you can't deny that he's an important figurehead in this fight against the Dark Lord."
The silence between them stretched on. Then there was a knock on the door. Draco swore, but Snape ignored him, getting to his feet again. "Yes," he called. The door opened, and Nut peeked in, seeming to be absolutely vibrating with excitement. He grinned when he took note of Draco's presence, but when he spoke, he was addressing Snape.
"Professor," he said, "the headmistress is asking for you. She caught Potter trying to use her fireplace, and now she wants you to bring Veritaserum so she can interrogate him."
Draco closed his eyes. Merlin's soddy pants. When he blinked his eyes open again, Snape's gaze was on him. It gave nothing away, and when Snape replied to Not's words, it was in the same drawling tone as always. As much as I support the idea of interrogating Potter, I have no Veritaserum left for the headmistress to use. Not's face fell at the news, and Snape sighed, getting to his feet. Don't worry, I'll come up and speak to her myself, he told him. With a glance at Draco, he added, You stay here, Mr. Malfoy. We'll resume our conversation when I'm done. Draco nodded rather numbly, watching as Snape left the room. When the door closed behind them, he cursed under his breath and began pacing. He should have known! He should have known things wouldn't go as smoothly. He should have insisted that the others waited while he spoke to Snape. Sure, Snape was being a difficult prick, but that was still better than Umbridge trying to force-feed Harry Veritaserum for breaking into her office and trying to use the flu connection. Godric and Salazar, how are they going to get out of this? Draco paced relentlessly through Snape's office for the entirety of his teacher's absence, and when his head of house finally did return, there was a new air of determination to his movements. He did neither speak nor acknowledge Draco as he immediately retrieved his wand the moment the door had closed behind him, conjuring his Patronus. Draco stared, flabbergasted, as a silvery doe appeared in the middle of the office, tilting its head in a curious manner to observe its surroundings and await instructions. Deliver a message to Sirius Black, he instructed. Black, Potter had a vision of you being held captive in the Ministry of Magic. Confirm your whereabouts. Then he waved his wand, and the doe turned and galloped through the walls, disappearing from sight. There was a tense silence between them as Snape returned to his desk, taking a seat behind it as he waited for an answer. Draco remained standing. They did not have to wait for long. Only a short while later, a silvery wolf dog appeared in the room, filling its space with Sirius's voice. "I'm at quarters. Is it drop?" "Yeah, of course it is." Snape groaned, getting to his feet again. "I warned Potter about this. He's entirely too gullible, and since he did not bother learning to defend his mind properly—" "It's not that he didn't bother!" Draco snapped. "You'd think, though," Snape returned, his voice icy, "that with two people trying to teach him, he'd at least have picked up some skills. So something like this wouldn't happen." Draco glowered at him, biting his tongue to refrain from responding. He knew it would get him nowhere. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Snape rolled his eyes, "I have to go back and make sure Potter doesn't make a run for it. I can't prevent him from being expelled at this point, not after breaking into the headmistress' office, and especially not after she put me on probation for not having Veritaserum to offer her. But I need to at least make sure he remains within the castle." He fixed Draco with a look. "And you," he growled, "will stay right where you are. Do you hear me?" Draco took a deep, steadying breath and nodded, his jaw clenched. His eyes were narrowed as he watched Snape leave the room again, and when the door closed once more behind him, he used every curse in his repertoire to let off some steam. Not that it made him feel any less trapped in this damp, muggy office. He couldn't believe this was happening. One catastrophe after another was unfurling around him, and he was stuck in Snape's damn office, away from Harry and everyone he cared about, unable to help. Draco expected Snape to be gone for a long while this time, so he was taken off guard when he burst through the door in a matter of minutes, once more muttering under his breath. "They're gone," he spat, flashing a glare so lethal at Draco that he was surprised it didn't slice right through him, as if it was somehow his fault. "There's a pathetic mob of your housemates sickening up in the headmistress's office, but Potter and his group of imbeciles are nowhere to be found, as well as the headmistress. Where did they go, Malfoy?" "I don't know," Draco answered, quite sincerely, panic rising inside of him. "But they wouldn't have taken Umbridge with them, would they?" "How would I know what they would do?" Snape hissed. He retrieved his wands once more, and with quick, efficient movements, conjured his Patronus another time. This time the doe stood more alert, as if it could tell that this was an emergency. "Find Albus Dumbledore," Snape ordered, his voice sharp. "Headmaster, Potter has disappeared. He's under the assumption that the Dark Lord is keeping Black captive at the Ministry of Magic, but I ascertained that Black is still positioned at the headquarters. Umbridge caught Potter in her office using the flu connection trying to make contact, and now there is no sign of neither Potter and his friends nor her. Alert the order. I'll search the grounds until I receive further instruction." With that, he ended the message and sent his Patronus on its way. At last, he turned to Draco. "You, back to your common room," he ordered. "You're kidding, right?" Draco gaped. "Do I look like I'm in the mood for jokes, Mr. Malfoy?" Snape snaps. "I want you out of my way and back in your common room. Don't speak to anyone about any of this. Do I make myself clear?" "I won't go anywhere," Draco shouted, not caring in the least that he was being insubordinate. "My best friends are missing, and you think I can just go about my evening and pretend nothing happened? I want to help!" "I can't take you along with me, Mr. Malfoy," Snape barked. "You're a student, and you're not equipped for the task. You will slow me down." Draco flushed, but refusing to back down, completely changed tracks in the speed of lightning. "Then I'll stay here," he countered, crossing his arms in a demonstration of his adamancy. "I want to be right at the source when something happens. Plus, you might need me eventually." "And whatever would I need you for, Malfoy?" Snape sneered. "I know Harry and Hermione like the back of my hand," Draco pointed out. "If anyone can figure out what they're planning, it's me." Snape seemed to have no immediate answer to that, and finally, with a groan of frustration, he retaliated. "I have no time for this," he muttered. "You won't set a foot out of this office. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Draco conceded. "I'll stay right where I am." "Don't make me regret this," Snape warned him. At that, he made for the door, once more leaving Draco in solitude in this abhorrent office that was starting to make him feel slightly claustrophobic. Still, it was better than being sent back to the Slytherin common room, where he had no means of finding out whether or not his friends were still alive. Draco pressed his face to his hands, taking a shaky breath. There was no way Harry was already at the Ministry, he tried to soothe himself. First, he needed to get there, and they were in Scotland, and the Ministry was located in London, so there was enough time to stop him. Only what if he had taken the flu to the Ministry? If they had overpowered the Inquisitorial squad in Umbridge's office somehow and fled through the fireplace? Realizing he couldn't breathe, Draco quickly took a seat and rested his head between his knees. He stayed like that until he could get air into his lungs again, and a while longer, until his ears stopped buzzing and the room had stopped spinning. Then he just sat there, staring numbly at Snape's desktop and waiting. It took hours until Snape returned, and by then he looked hassled and exhausted, and Draco had been back and forth through various panic attacks and mental breakdowns. "Did you find them?" Draco asked him, his voice trembling, as Snape took a seat across from him. He looked up to take in Draco's face, eyes lingering on his for a long moment, and Draco felt like he was going to have another breakdown right then and there if Snape didn't start speaking right now. When his teacher eventually answered, his voice was devoid from the characteristic anger. "I didn't," he told Draco. "But we know where they are." "The Ministry," Draco said, immediately closing his eyes against the prickling of impending tears. "Yes," Snape confirmed. "The Order sent out reinforcements to get them out of there. I'm waiting for further information." Draco couldn't speak. This couldn't be happening. "They lured the headmistress out of the office by pretending to want to reveal some sort of weapon within the forbidden forest to her," Snape explained. "It was Granger's idea. That's what I could gather once Mr. Knott stopped sickening up. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had apparently enticed them to eat some of their older brother's special sweets, which ended up incapacitating them." Even without opening his eyes, Draco could tell that Snape was curling his lip in displeasure at his student's stupidity. "That's how they could escape. I assume they caught up with Potter and Granger once they had rid themselves of the headmistress." "How did they do that?" Draco asked, barely getting the words out. "A run-in with the centaurs," Snape elaborated. "I found Umbridge a little earlier. She is not in the best of shapes, if I might say so." He sounded remarkably unfeeling. Draco nodded. He could not bring himself to say anything else. "I'd really rather you went back to your own quarters, Mr. Malfoy." Snape attended once more. "You could use a bit of rest." "No!" Draco shook his head, finally opening his eyes to blearily glare at Snape. "I'm not going anywhere." "The hospital wing, then," Snape tried. "I can inform you once I have any news from the Order." "No!" Draco repeated. "I'm staying." Snape sighed, shaking his head, but thankfully he stopped bothering Draco about it. It took an eternity until news from the Order came in. By the time Dumbledore's Patronus, a bright silvery phoenix, lit up Snape's office, it was already late at night, and a full-blown headache had developed behind Draco's right eye, throbbing as he looked right at it.
"Students are safe, and one casualty on our side, Sirius Black, was killed. Other than that, all the injuries. The prophecy was destroyed before Voldemort could get to it. Fudge caught sight of Voldemort before he got away. I will see the injured students to the hospital wing and then have a conversation with Harry in my office." Please meet me there.
The phoenix vanished with the end message, leaving Draco to stare at the empty spot it left incredulously.
The anticlimactic delivery of the information he had been waiting for all evening made it hard for his brain to process what he had heard. Sirius was dead. Harry was alive. Someone was injured. Fudge had seen the Dark Lord, which meant his return was now an undeniable fact even to the Ministry. And there had been something about a prophecy, though Draco had not understood that part. Draco looked up when Snape got to his feet, dark eyes meeting his. "Well," he muttered, pursing his lips, "are you coming or not?" Draco blinked, surprised that Snape was not trying to send him to his dormitory again, but deciding not to chance his luck in jumping to his feet, following the professor out of the office in which he had been stuck for the better part of the evening. The corridors of the castle were dark and abandoned as they made their way to the hospital wing, but Draco could hear the portraits muttering as they passed, clearly aware that something had happened. When they finally pushed open the doors to the infirmary, there was a flurry of movement inside, and Draco had to blink against the sudden onslaught of brightness. Dumbledore was standing in the middle of the room, talking to Madame Pomfrey, who was making rounds from one occupied bed to the other. Draco could see Weasley on the one closest to him, eyes closed, and Hermione on the one next to him, unconscious as well. The one behind them was curtained off, but clearly occupied too. On the other side, Luna was resting on another bed, her eyes occasionally fluttering open, though she obviously wasn't fully lucid. Next to her sat Ginny, who was balancing her ankle gingerly on a stool, though she had apparently been healed already. On the bed to their left sat Longbottom, who Draco hadn't even known had been there, and he looked visibly shaken, but mostly unhurt. Or maybe he had been healed.
"Severus,"
Dumbledore spoke up, taking note of Snape's presence.
"I'm glad you're here. I need you to take care of everything while I speak to Harry. Wake the other staff if you need support. Phileas should be notified, seeing that one of his students was involved, and maybe Pornona should take it upon herself to notify the families of the Gryffindor students, seeing that Minerva is out of action. Through the Order, the Weasleys are naturally up to speed, but we need to send notices to the Grangers and Augusta Longbottom."
"Very well." Snape nodded. "Professor," Draco spoke up, unable to help himself, "how is Harry?" Dumbledore's sharp blue eyes landed on him then, and he frowned as if surprised to find Draco here. It took a moment for him to answer.
"He's not hurt,"
he said finally,
"but he's very shaken by what happened. I really need to speak to him."
"Can I—" Draco began, but Dumbledore was already shaking his head.
"I'm afraid I can't allow you to question him tonight, Draco,"
Dumbledore told him firmly, though not unkindly.
"He has been through a terrible ordeal."
"I don't want to question him!" Draco called desperately. "I just want to see him! Talk to him!"
"I understand."
Dumbledore nodded, his voice gentle as he approached Draco, placing a hand on his shoulder.
"It must have been incredibly nerve-wracking for you, waiting here and not knowing whether your friends were dead or alive. But Harry has just watched his godfather die. I think you need to give him some space."
Draco bit his lip, blinking against the fresh tears in his eyes. He had never felt so freaking useless in his entire life. Dumbledore squeezed his shoulder in sympathy before letting go and turning to address Snape once more. Draco did not hear what was being said, but shortly after, they both left the hospital wing. Ginny got to her feet as soon as they'd left, balancing herself gingerly on her previously injured ankle as she approached Draco, but not letting it deter her. She pulled him into a tight hug as she reached him. "How is everyone?" Draco breathed into her hair, clinging to her in an unusual display of vulnerability towards anyone, not Harry or Hermione or his mother.
"Roughened up, but they'll get through," Ginny muttered. "Ron touched something he shouldn't have, and it messed with his brain. Hermione was hit by some curse, and Luna was hit by a stunner and knocked out. Madame Pomfrey will patch them up."
"And you?" Draco asked.
"Nothing much," Ginny shrugged, pulling away to smile at him. "A broken ankle, that's all. Neville had a broken nose."
Draco looked over at Longbottom, who indeed had bloodstains on his robes, but only smiled sheepishly at Draco and shrugged.
"What happened?" Draco asked, turning back to Ginny.
Ginny sighed, taking Draco's hand and pulling him across the room to sit with her and Longbottom, the boys on the bed next to Luna's, and Ginny on the chair she had abandoned earlier, propping up her smarting ankle once more.
"Well, as you can probably tell by now, it was a trap," Ginny sighed. "When we got into the Department of Mysteries, Sirius wasn't there."
"I know," Draco muttered. Snape contacted Sirius and got word back that he was at Grimmauld Place. So if you'd actually stopped for a moment and waited for backup...
Well, crap,
Ginny groaned, exchanging a look with Longbottom.
you might not want to mention that in front of Harry.
Draco's stomach turned.
Believe me,
Draco breathed.
the last thing I want to do now is brag about how I was right.
Ginny gave him a sad smile and reached out to squeeze his hand.
I didn't think so,
She said softly. Draco gulped. It felt alien, having Ginny reached out to him like that, but his body craved the physical reassurance, so he did not pull away.
So what happened next? Draco inquired, when you figured out Sirius wasn't there.
There was some kind of glass bowl with Harry's name on it,
Longbottom explained, a frown on his face.
A prophecy? It seemed like that's what you-know-who was after, but only Harry could actually pick it up. So when he did, all those Death Eaters turned up, Ginny continued. Your father, your aunt, and they demanded that he handed over the prophecy. Harry refused and we tried to flee, but we got lost in the department and had so many bloody doors. And then they just cornered us,
Longbottom told him, his eyes wide.
And the order turned up to back us and hell broke loose. The prophecy got smashed, and somewhere in the chaos...
Longbottom caught Ginny's eyes.
Sirius,
Draco breathed, not needing them to voice it. He felt numb. Sirius had been his cousin, and despite that, he had only ever actually met him twice and spoken to him once. It was almost laughable now how they kept missing each other, with Draco unable to enter the headquarters of the Order of Phoenix, and not speaking to Harry at the end of 4th year, not accompanying them to meet up with him at Hogsmeade. There had always been one thing or another, always an excuse, and Draco hadn't bothered to push, because Sirius had been more focused on Harry than on him anyway, and Draco hadn't minded, because Harry didn't have any family to dote on him, so Sirius might as well do the job properly. Draco had not needed the attention, but now he wished he had made more of an effort. Draco barely realized that Ginny had started speaking again until she squeezed his hand once more.
After she killed Sirius, Harry went after your aunt. She must have called you-know-who. I don't know what happened, but he was there, and Harry was, and then there was Dumbledore, and there was a huge fight. It only ended when ministry officials burst in.
Draco nodded, unable to speak. There was a long silence between them, only broken when Madame Pomfrey clambered over to their side of the room.
Off to your dormitories, the 3 of you, she said briskly. You 2 are healed, and you, Mr. Malfoy, are uninjured as far as I can tell. I have enough beds to fill tonight. Off you go.
They didn't protest, even though Draco's eyes did linger on Hermione's still figure for a long moment before he followed the others out of the room. They walked together up to the staircase where Ginny and Longbottom had to bid their good nights to Draco.
Will you be all right?
Ginny asked worriedly.
You don't look well, Draco.
Draco shrugged, hoping it was enough of an answer. Ginny pursed her lips, but thankfully let the subject drop. Despite the clear orders from Madame Pomfrey, Draco did not return to the Slytherin quarters. Instead, he made his way to where he knew Dumbledore's office was located, and then leaned against the wall in front of the gargoyles guarding the entrance. Draco knew that Dumbledore would be displeased to see him, but he could not bring himself to stay away. He needed to see Harry, and he needed to see him tonight. There was no way he would be able to fall asleep without seeing his face, and if anything Hermione had told him throughout this year was going to be believed, and he and Harry really had a special connection of sorts, Harry was going to be in need of his company now more than ever. At least Draco was sure that if their roles were reversed, he would be craving for Harry's presence. So when the gargoyles finally moved, revealing a staircase from which Harry and Dumbledore slowly descended, he pushed himself off the wall and stepped into view, his heart in his throat. Harry looked horrible. His skin was so pale that it looked gray in the moonlight, and he seemed wrung out, as if all life had left his body and he was held together merely by some kind of outer force. His eyes were red and bloodshot as they landed on him.
Harry!
Draco breathed, his voice cracking.
Draco,
Dumbledore sighed.
I thought I told you.
I know, Draco said quickly. And I'm not here to ask questions. I know all I need to know.
He broke off, taking a step towards Harry, who was still staring at him. Draco gulped, whispering,
I'm so sorry, Harry.
For what?
Harry breathed.
For not having been there, Draco shrugged, his eyes stinging again. For not acting quick enough to prevent it from happening in the first place, for...
Stop talking.
Harry cut him off, his voice sharp. But... Before Draco could continue, Harry had reached out to him, clenching his fingers in Draco's robes and pulling him close, until they were almost chest to chest. Harry's eyes bored into Draco's, green orbs intense, almost angry, as he hissed,
Do you have any idea what would have happened if you had been there? Bellatrix went after Sirius for a reason. She killed him because they were cousins. If she had seen you there, she'd have gone after you. And I won't lose you too. Do you understand me?
There were tears in Draco's eyes again, and he rested his forehead against Harry's.
If I thank Merlin for one thing today, it's that I didn't take you with us.
Harry breathed.
I wish I hadn't gone in the first place, but at least I didn't pull you into it too. So stop with all that nonsense, will you?
Mutely, Draco nodded, before giving in to the urge to wrap his arms around Harry. The other boy sort of sagged into his embrace, as if the tension fled from his body, and he leaned into Draco, breathing deeply. They stayed like that for a long moment, neither of them speaking. It was Dumbledore who broke them out of it.
I think both of you really need to sleep.
He noted, his tone gentle.
Harry, do you want Draco to accompany you to the hospital wing?
Harry sniffed once, maybe trying to rein himself in, and then nodded. His hand came around Draco's, holding on tightly, as if he was afraid Dumbledore would force him to let go.
Very well,
Dumbledore conceded.
He could stay with you until the dreamless sleep takes effect, but then he'll return to the Slytherin dormitories for a good night's sleep. Do we have a deal?
Draco wanted to argue, and honestly, Harry looked like he wanted to as well, but they knew there was no point. So they trailed after Dumbledore to the hospital wing, where Harry was shown to the bed Draco had earlier sat on with Longbottom, the one next to Luna's. Draco checked on Hermione as Harry changed into pajamas, and when he slipped under the covers, he returned to his side. Harry reached for Draco's hand, and Draco took it, carefully entwining their fingers. Madame Pomfrey measured a cup of dreamless sleep for Harry and pushed it into his free hand.
There you go, she encouraged. Drink the whole lot, and you should have an uninterrupted night.
Harry nodded, catching Draco's eyes once more. Draco squeezed his hand. Harry lifted the cup to his lips and drank the potion down in one go, his swallows growing sloppier with each turn. Draco reached out to take the cup from him just in time before it fell from his hand, and Harry's head dropped to the pillow. He was fast asleep. Draco put the empty cup on the bedside table, allowing himself one moment to just sit there at Harry's side, look at him, and hold his hand. Then Madame Pomfrey threw him out, and he had to return to his own dormitory. He did not think he would be able to sleep that night, but once his head hit the pillow, he was gone to the world.